Before I can start building the jig, I need to cut a recess in the new base that I made for my trim router. If you haven't seen it, I have a video showing exactly how I made this new base. And there are a few different ways this recess can be cut, but I'm going to be doing it on a table saw. Got a scrap of plywood here. I'm going to stick the base down to it with double-sided tape and then nibble away the material until I have it wide enough. It's also important to put this recess in the right place. This needs to be right below the place where the threaded rod for the jig screws into the base of the router. With that done, I can take it off the plywood, and I need to cut a strip that fits in here but is free to move back and forth. It's not strictly necessary, but I'm going to round over the end where the pivot pin will be. And the pivot pin is actually a 1/8 inch drill bit, the shank of it cut to the right length. I'm holding it with a pair of pliers and I'll cut it off with the grinder, nice and straight. And I'm not going to deburr this, I'm going to leave it as it is. What I'm doing here is I'm using a bigger drill bit to create a countersink so that a little bit of glue will pull in around this pin, and that'll keep it in place. Now I can put the pin through. The burr from cutting it will hold it on the other side, and epoxy will hold it on this side, going down inside that recess. I let the epoxy dry overnight, and now I'm using a file to get rid of the excess. What I need next is the distance from that threaded hole down to the top of the recess. So I've got a scrap of wood here to mark, and then I'll use my tape to measure from the top of the recess to that mark. And that'll give me the measurement that I need to mark on the block that the threaded rod will go through. And that block is another piece of hardwood. I've got a piece of cherry here. I'm going to cut it to the right size. And then I'm going to cut it to the right length after trimming off the end. And now I'm making that mark on the end so that I can use a 1/4 inch drill bit to drill a hole all the way through. Now that I have the hole drilled, I can cut the block in half, and I'm going to do that with my mini table saw sled. I also need a piece of 1/2 inch plywood. This is a spacer first, then I'll turn it into a wheel that you use to adjust the diameter of the jig. So I've taken a strip with the pivot pin and I've put it in the recess, and I've slid it over as far as I think it'll need to be, ever, and I'm making a mark to tell me where I can glue on those blocks. Here's that piece of 1/2 inch plywood that I cut, and I'm using that to space the blocks the right distance apart. And then after the glue dried, I can take that spacer out and trim off the end. Now I'm going to take that spacer and put it back in and use the same 1/4 inch drill bit that I drilled the hole with, and just use the tip of it to make a mark on the spacer so that I can lay it out to the right size for the knob and also drill the hole in the right place. Now the hole that I'm drilling here is smaller than the threaded rod. I'm going to be using the threaded rod to tap threads in this. And to do that, I'm just cutting a slot on the end of the threaded rod, and then I'll put that in my drill and power it through. The way that I'm doing this here is the best way. The blocks will guide the threaded rod straight and make sure that you don't wind up with something that has a wobble. Just running it back and forth a couple times to make sure that the thread is nice and clean. Then I can bring it to the sander and turn it into a wheel. What I'm doing here is I'm making those holes in the blocks a little bit bigger so that the threaded rod doesn't get hung up in there. Then I can take a few seconds to smooth off the jig and screw in the threaded rod and see how it works. Now the way this does work is that the threaded rod screws into the base of the router, and you need a nut on here to tighten up to lock it in place. And then you can adjust this jig in and out to get the right diameter circle that you're looking for. Now, the first thing you're going to say is, wow, that looks pretty slow. And it is. It can be a little bit tedious. Luckily, you probably won't be making 100 circles a day, so leaving it like this will probably work for almost everybody. And given the size of the wheel and the amount of friction involved here, it's very doubtful that this thing will turn while you're using it. But you can add another nut, in this case a wing nut, to lock it in place if you want to be absolutely certain that it's not going to turn. Now, like I said, you can leave it like this, or you can go a little bit further, which is what I'm going to show right now. I'm taking it off, and I'm going to take that wheel, and I'm going to cut a notch in it that's slightly smaller on the end than the threaded rod, so it kind of clicks in place. And this is going to be a fit and file situation where you're going to try it, and if it doesn't go, you'll file a little bit more and then try it again, and so on and so forth until you get it to click in place. And I'm showing the perfect fit right here where it just snaps in place, and you can rotate it to make fine adjustments. And then when you need to make a big adjustment, all you need to do is pop it back out again, move the jig, and then put it back in. All right, now I can try it out, and this is a piece of particle board. I'm going to drill a 1/8 inch pilot hole for the jig to fit in, and I'm going to put the jig in place, slide in the wheel until it clicks, and then I can make fine adjustments if needed and cut my circle. Here's that fast adjustment in action again. I've taken out the wheel so I can slide the router to where I need to make the next cut, and then I can pop that wheel back in and make that cut. And some of you are probably saying that, that wheel's not going to last forever. The threading can't be too durable, and that notch will probably wear out eventually. And yes, it probably will, but I think you're going to get a lot of circles cut before that happens. And you know what? You made it, so you can make a new one. No problem. In fact, it wouldn't be a bad idea to make 2 or 3 of these wheels while you're at it. And then you'd always have one as a backup. And if you still have doubts about the durability of the threading in the plywood, you can always use something a little bit tougher, like plastic. And that's what I'm doing here. And this is made in exactly the same way as the plywood one, and it just pops right in. Now the offset feature of this jig, where the tongue fits under the base, you can flip that around and get extra reach for the big circles you need to cut. And of course, you can always use a longer threaded rod as well. Now, because this is definitely a keeper, and to make it more visible in my shop, I decided to paint mine so it'd be easier to see. Anyway, I hope you liked this and you found it helpful. I've used the previous version of this jig many times before, and I've always appreciated having it on hand. It's very easy to set up, and with this new quick release function, it's even faster to use.